there is lots of opportunity to chip in and speak or not speak as you feel. Also, if people feel to put on video, that's always nice. And if not, it is totally as good. So Tabiso and I have been quite excited to get this group going. We really wanted to create a space where one, we could share discussions that excite us, and two, provide a space where writers can share their own experiences and get whatever information they need. And we hope over time this can be, for the Writers Guild, a beautiful place where people can just come and connect and encourage each other and support each other on their journey. Tabiso, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically considering where we are as an industry, but also where we are as personally as writers. We figure that, because the community is now having to be virtual, that we should start communicating and we should start being a group of people who want to share ideas and to also share experiences. And we think that perhaps this is the best way we can do that, through discussions, through topics and things like that. So Gavin introduced this concept to me that we should share ideas, even if it is from a very writer point of view. And generally, we tend not to work with each other, but there should be the opportunity for us to discuss things and push us forward as a community.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So what Tabiso said is very true. Normally we don't get to work together unless you happen to be on a TV writing team. Mostly we sit in isolation, and there's very little opportunity to know what other writers go through or what it means to be a writer in this industry or in this time, or just to be a writer. Which brings us really to our first topic, because writing, and particularly storytelling, more than even than writing, is a calling. And it's a role that we play in society, and it's been there as long as humans have been around. It just means something a bit different today, because it's become more of a collaborative activity. But the writer's job and the storyteller's job is still just really, really, it's perhaps one of the most crucial that there are, because it creates people's perceptions of reality. The stories we spin kind of determines how people see the world. And at the moment, we've kind of grown up mostly in an era where film and television has been the principal storytelling mediums. And they're certainly the most powerful that have ever come along, because of the mixed medium and the opportunity to use sound and the vicarious nature of it, where you can sit and you feel like it's real. And we've mostly been exposed to unhealthy stories. A lot of things coming out through Hollywood have really given us a false impression of reality. So romantic comedies is one of my bugbears, and so many people have in my generation and younger just have no sense of what a relationship really is, because they have this in their minds and in their hearts, and it's confusing. So this idea of a storyteller as being a calling and what that entails can be very personal, depending on what your journey has been and what it's been about. But there is kind of an esoteric and spiritual element to that, to just having a calling. It sort of suggests that there's purpose, and in your life, fulfilling that purpose matters and becomes part of your own story. And that's certainly been my experience. But it's not really talked about much. There's very little, like if you go to film school or if you go to online courses, and there's very little talking about it in that way. So we felt it would be a nice place to kick off. And what we're going to do in terms of the format is just have a space for Tabiso and I to explore the topic first, probably for about 40 minutes. And then we're just going to open up the floor, and you can talk about this topic if you want to explore it or add anything. Or if you have any questions at all, this is a space to discuss whatever you feel. And so Tabiso, maybe I should kick it off to you. What has it meant to you to be called to be a storyteller, and what has your journey been like?
Okay, so from my side, I mean, I've dedicated my life to making films, and that has really led to two definitions for being a storyteller, especially specifically in South Africa. for me personally, there's the call to, tell the stories you're born to tell. I mean, tell the stories you want to tell, you dream of telling. And those are really, really difficult stories to tell because it requires a massive inner journey, massive personal, I would say, adventure to try to discover your voice and to try put that into a screenplay. I'm coming further than that as being a filmmaker, taking that, working with actors and so forth. But generally starting with just putting it onto a screenplay is the hardest thing in the world to do as a filmmaker because it's that personal to you. Then there's the other side, the performance writing side, paying the bills, if you will. That has been, the push and pull of our whole, adventure. Do you take this gift that you have and use it for, making stories for the masses, or do you turn it into something that you personally are happy to do, to work with? So for me as a storyteller, it's been this, this balance between the two, seeing either one of them fail and, relying on the other to prop up the first. I mean, to prop up the other, if that makes any sense. So where does the balance between being a performance writer and being a writer of stories, your own writer, where does that line shift? And it's a journey I figure out every single day, trying to pay the bills and trying to make stuff that I truly care about. And I think that you've mentioned the esoteric side of it. I personally think that when we're telling stories and when we're engaging with stories, it's sort of a religious experience for us. I mean, we all know what it's like to be in the movie theater or even in a dark room looking at a screen and a story's playing out. And sometimes there's like this remoteness from us as storytellers to our own work, but we understand that other people view our work in that way. And it's a weird thing. It's a strange thing to, for someone to say, hey, listen, I really connected to your story when it's so personal to ourselves, really. So I find that to be the thing, performance versus art. And the journey between the two, if it is a journey, some people choose one or the other. That balance is the thing I struggle with every single day. I don't know, Gavin, do you find that to be the case with you? Do you find the journey between the two being two polar opposites that fight with each other, or have you managed to find a balance between them?
I think eventually now I'm starting to bring them into balance. But for most of us, that's the calling, is how do you tell stories you want to tell? That's the thing. There's something in your heart that you want to express, and it's fundamentally what's really driving you. And in the industry, it's very, very, very hard to get to a place of being able to tell your own stories the way you'd like to tell them. Because like for me, that's always was my journey quite early on. The thing in my heart from a very young age was to tell stories that would raise consciousness, that would change our story and the stories we tell ourselves as people and the way we relate to the world. And part of the challenge with film is that it's not just about the story itself, it's about the way it's made, because it's a group event and a team sport, and whatever happens in front of that camera records. So if you in what is very commonly like an ego-driven hierarchical sort of team, I hesitate to even use the word, but production, it's very rare that truly magical work will result. And it's very rare that a story will, in its integrity, move through a process like that. There's always stuff that will come and undermine that story one way or another. So finding the right allies, finding producers and directors who share a vision and who, are about the work and not just about a big ego or a big check or whatever it is, and actually have the ability to make movies. In South Africa is virtually impossible. There's very few people who fit that definition, and finding them, was a matter of synchronicity and luck for me. And it's taken me, I mean, they're still kind of arriving in my life, but the most important one who I've got a film kicking off this year with, hopefully we're in the legal stage, but until it's signed and checks in the bank, you don't really know. Has been a man named Bruce McDonald from Boomtown Films. And when we met, there was just resonance. And he has shown me over a few years, that it is just about the work. And, he has the networks and things to make these things happen. And he's done it before. But, absent one, really lucky meeting, that wouldn't be in my life, and I'd still be really doing my best trying to just find the right people to work with. So that's the one kind of thing, is just how do you actually find the people you need to play with? Because once you do that, then there doesn't need to be any fall off between art and performance. It can be exactly the same thing. And for me, the best films are the ones, that have everything from, I mean, entertainment first and foremost, because that's the medium. But the other thing is, how do you take that seed that's in you and learn to express it as it should be? Because, when you start writing or you start any art, I'd imagine, there's inspiration, but technique and craft and the ability to get out what's in is the journey in a big, big way. I feel like almost once you can do that, the right people will fall into place. But mastering your own craft is mastering yourself, and it takes a huge amount of time. And in South Africa, again, so hard to do because you need lots of time to practice, and you need your support that we don't really get here. So it's really quite a catch-22 here. You can go into TV and hone your chops and work in a team, and that's very helpful if you can do it. Opportunities are few and far between, and the pay is terrible. And that's generally the problem here, is the pay is always terrible. So to actually get the time to do what you need to do and make that time is a trick. And I know how I did it. I don't know how many people can do it. So on the other hand, there is this thing of calling and purpose. So for me, my whole path has enabled that. It's been possible, but with big sacrifices, but I was given there was a way for me, and I didn't know what that way was when I started to do it. It's something you kind of discover as you go. It just kind of happens. You never know the next step until the next step really appears, and it's quite a path of trust. But yeah, I think at this point I'm kind of maneuvered myself to that place where it's possible to launch from, but I haven't yet got into the launching and the working and the stuff, but it's all kind of lined up, and I've done a lot along the way. But that thing of being able to do my films in a way that when I see them on screen, they will still be my films, and that the production quality will be high enough that they can actually be enjoyed by an international audience. Because like with SABC, the budgets doesn't make it possible. Whatever you do, when you get to screen, it's not going to be great. So yeah.
I think, adding to that, you've mentioned something that's really important. And first of all, that's having a team behind you that believes in you as a storyteller, as a writer. And I think that in such a producer-driven climate, like in South Africa, the economics of the project outweigh, the aspirations of the creativity. If it's going to sell to the audience or if it's going to sell to the broadcaster, trumping the nature of expression of story. I think that from my side, being still a young writer compared to yourself, I struggle, of course, with trying to understand that, performance does drive this art. And because I don't necessarily have like this massive career behind me, I can't necessarily walk into a room and say, hey, look, I'm a great storyteller, trust in this project that I have. No, most of the time the conversation is, we have some money, we want to make something, this is what we want to make, can you make it? So I think mastering the craft, learning the ins and outs of it and learning all the rules and breaking the rules helps with that aspect of, hey, you have a story, you have some money, I can develop it for you, we can push it forward. I think doing that and doing that a lot, as you mentioned in TV, where the money is not so great, I think is definitely a great place for someone who has no idea how to tell a story and wants to tell a story, or perhaps doesn't know the craft of it for screen just yet, but has this inkling. I mean, when I started off, I came from a place where I was writing short stories and, I was an engineer. Then I managed to, catch a lucky break and make a short film through the NFVF. And, the rest is history. Not a lot of people have that. And as you mentioned right now, going into TV, how do you still develop your voice as a storyteller while working as someone who's, I won't say a glorified typewriter, but someone who is, obeying a storyline that's there, obeying something that's already been dictated to them as from a head writer. And really, if you're working on a telenovela or a soapy, The story's already been written. All you're there to do is put some dialogue to it. How do you still develop as a storyteller? How do you nurse your creative ambitions?
Is that to me? Because
I think it's to everyone really, but I'll start with you, Gavin. How did you find? I mean, for example, from my side, there was definitely a point when I made my first film as a short film. Then my second film was just me writing it, and I was completely removed from the process of producing it. The second one, I tried to force my way back in and trying to say, listen, at least as a writer, let me be on set to see it. And then the third one, well, it was a repeat of the first experience. And I realized quite quickly that I had to be assertive in my own, my own craft, and to really not look to other people for opportunities to develop the craft. I had to write my own screenplays. I had to, figure out how a camera works. I had to be my own director as well. But that's not, that's just me. I don't believe that the majority of writers want to do that, but they still want to, grow. They still want to be your Paul Schraders of this world, making Taxi Driver. But, understanding the realities of South African filmmaking and TV series making, they have to work for TV, and they have to create stuff that's, dictated to them by other factors. How did you manage to, reconcile yourself with that? And when did you break away from that? When did you say, listen, I have a calling, and that's to be someone who, tells bigger stories than this?
Well, in a way, it's something I was conscious of from the beginning. So I knew the industry I was getting into, and I knew how hard it would be to do what I want to do, and that would be kind of a life's journey of its own. In some ways, I was able to merge the two, and in some ways, you still can't. So I think every writer, basically, if they want to really be the storyteller, has to do what you do and become producer and director. I mean, it's not just South Africa, across the board, producers are dictating story, and it's, coming, mostly through also the requirements of the distributors. So, even directors are basically puppets. They're basically told to, they have very little creative freedom. The producer is dictating that film. And with the writer, there's quite an issue because, theoretically, the writer should have the IP of the film that they dream into being. And making sure that, the IP is clear is a big part of why Hollywood gets people to rewrite things like 10 times over and, 10 people to rewrite it, so that no one can challenge the fact that they own the IP. And, in my journey, one, I always look for people who were at least trying to tell stories similar to my own, or stories that I could live with. So the first time I really got to make fiction, I was head writer of a series on SABC2 called Amaza, which means waves. And it was a coming of age teen story that was happening on, it was set in Muizenberg. And that was for a company called Community Media Trust and a producer named Lucilla. And she was a really good-hearted woman, and she had kind of put the bones of the story together. And then you come with the idea, people don't know how to conceive a story. Then often however they put that seed, you really have to reweave, because it's not going to work out as they wanted to. So you get to go in and at least as head writer, and start with that basic. Okay, well, we're going to tell a story about a group of kids, and there's going to be surfing, and one needs to be Muslim because she was Muslim and she wanted that line, and you've just got like a few broad things, and from that you can play. And then with SABC, you're going to have some limitations about what you can do and what you can't do. And we had some very surprising later changes that were not in the scripts, but they enforced on us, like forcing non-linear storytelling to be edited linearly, because I didn't think at a very late stage that our audience could grasp it. You do that, and you also quickly realize that writing for SABC isn't going to take you anywhere. So all along, as I was developing my own ideas, but I kind of stopped doing that quite a few years ago, because you can, once you've got, say, 5 or 6, 7 ideas that cover a range of budget ranges, you can't, there's no point in coming up with new ones, because until you've actually made them, it's kind of a dead thing in your box somewhere or on your computer. So really, I just focused on finding people I could tell stories with, and I teamed up with a guy named Garen Campbell, who came to me. I first edited his script through the NFVF, and then it was a story that I could really tell. And the problem with also development and writing is that unless you've mastered the craft, it'll never be world class, and it needs to be world class. And there's very few people who can do that. So the writer he was working with was a good friend of his. Is such a great guy, but he didn't have the chops at that point to take it all the way. So I took over, and we became a writing team, the three of us, and I became the lead writer. And that's been something then that he was able to, as a commercials director, put in money and send to, the different festivals and push itself. And we just won the Guild Muse Award for that script for the unproduced feature, but we've got interest from some international parties, but we haven't got it over the line. And it might take us, another year, 2 years, 3 years, who knows, to do that. But we keep pushing each other ahead. So, as I expand my contact range, more things open up, as he does the same. But I do have, and I've looked for collaborators who we can all push in the same direction together. And that definitely makes it easier. I don't really think it's possible to do alone. I think you do need to find those people you can play with and then go play.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to me actually, because really being someone whose voice is directly tied to producing the image as well as what's on the page. I've only found it to be the case when I've surrounded myself with people, producers, fellow filmmakers, when really the creativity, the spark and the belief in yourself comes through. Because before then, as you've said, it's a bunch of stories you've written, you've put into a shelf somewhere or an iCloud drive, and they haven't worked out. So they look as if they're failed projects. But for me personally, I always say, well, maybe they're just projects that haven't been realized just yet. So taking that one project and then sitting on it and saying, I'm not going to move from this project until I get some traction onto it and try to move the pieces into place, I think has been probably the biggest learning experience I've had as a storyteller. And the only reason why I asked this is because I think I spent yesterday and a couple of days before watching a lot of South African films, and trying to understand what makes South African films successful here, what doesn't here. I mean, realizing that it's really just up to chance. I mean, at the end of the day, chance is what brought Kandasamis into a trilogy of films which are been highly successful. And I found that because there's relatable people on screen, because there's people who the audience buys into, it makes like a film that South African audiences want to partake in. But when you're watching them, you're criticizing as a writer. You're like, okay, but it wasn't great story, it wasn't great dialogue, but realistically speaking, because there was representation, because there was some idea of a film that was pushed through, and the film exists now in a medium for anyone to watch. So to reconcile those two things, being world class and pushing yourself to being a world class filmmaker, and realizing that you can be world class, but it does take time to actually make the films you want to make versus what's on screen right now. That has been a huge challenge for me, and it's only because I've been able to align myself with fellow filmmakers who are trying to do the same thing that it's kept me going. I can imagine being alone right now. I don't know what the rest of the rest of the people participating in this meeting, maybe they can speak to their own experiences a bit later on, but being alone in this industry is probably one of the worst things in the world. You're truly facing a position where your own voice, and I don't just mean the voice you speak with, but your voice as a storyteller is bouncing off a wall. And I don't know if someone tried to say something right there, but but you get what I'm saying. I don't know if you've had that experience where finally having that validation of meeting someone who gets the kind of story you want to tell and really wants to fight for it as well, validates your own ability as a storyteller beyond craft. I mean, craft, you have to really push yourself to be here and above, but just that validation alone does so much as a storyteller. Maybe answers the calling.
No, it certainly does. And I just love to speak to two things you mentioned there. And the time's the first, and patience. But the second, just in terms of what you're saying, is, as writers, some of us, are kind of taught or expected to, or think that we can do it ourselves. And it really is that thing, as you're saying, you can't see your own voice. And no matter how awesome your ideas, it's just your ideas. And they're so familiar that to see yourself truly is really, really, really hard, if not impossible. And overseas, like in America, where there's more resources for scripts, but even across the board, scripts aren't written alone. It's very, very rare that someone's totally writing a script on their own, or at least a good one. There's always a team involved. So a good producer knows story and will work with a writer to get out their own head and be able to see things a bit more clearly. There's normally a script editor on board in international production who's do the same thing. Plus, the director should know story well, and you've got a few things. And beyond that, even when you're into Hollywood, they specialize. You have a team of writers, some doing dialogue, some doing the structure, some doing action sequences. They get all sorts of specialists who will come in and do things. That's not the way it works here. And personally, I wouldn't like to write that way. Like if I write a script, then personally, I rather would be doing everything so that there's an integrity of voice. But it's very, very helpful, and I really appreciate it when I'm working with people who bring something to the table story-wise, and they can look at that and okay, wait, Gav, this is not off, or it can be better, or maybe this is unnecessary, or because that always takes it to the next level. And for me as a writer, you really have to be very willing and eager even to work with others and take the criticism, and as long as it's coming from a good place, it helps a lot. So that's the one thing, so I don't think people should really try and do everything alone and then expect it to be great. And that's where the time factor also comes in, because there's some magic in the way that scripts kind of reach maturation and come to a place of being screen ready. And often I've found, like in my own process, that when I write a draft, when I finish that draft, I've taken it as far as I can. It's as good as it can be. But give myself 6 months and I look at that again and I'm like, oh, geez, I can't believe I did that. That's sure. So, and suddenly just that 6 months of growth means I can look at that script in a new way and take it further and make it better. But I just didn't yet have what I needed in myself to see it properly. And sometimes a script has to just sit on that shelf and wait till the right time, till you're really ready for the true form of that story to come out. If your intention is to take it to where it's supposed to be and to serve the story, then it can just be that it waits and it takes you here and there until it's ready. And there's a process that shapes you as much as it's you shaping the story. And the same also with deals that fall through and so on. There's just an incredible amount of magic and synchronicity in film, and just allowing things to take their time, to have the patience to let the process reveal the product and how it should be done is something you definitely learn along the way, to just trust that process. But yeah, learning patience and having trust, because it take years. It takes years and years, and it's really, really hard. So, if you can't just accept that, it is for the best, then you are going to get super frustrated and pissed off and quit. That would be my guess. But we'll ask other people just now.
Well, I'm going to actually ask him further about that, because you mentioned something which I think is probably the most important thing. Sometimes the story is the story and you have to meet it. And that's, of course, growing to meet it. When you just mentioned writing a draft of a screenplay and taking as far as you can, and then coming back 6 months later on, maybe after some crazy events have happened in your life, or rather a great amount of introspection has happened. Because I think Catherine was echoing earlier, mastering your craft is mastering yourself. And I wonder sometimes when you're writing stories and we're seeing it's not quite working out in this draft, it's not quite working out in this iteration, or even it's not working out as a film, maybe it works as a series, but you're not ready to make that jump yet for the story. When do you need to have the confidence to say, okay, maybe it's not me, maybe it's the story, and I have to meet the story at a certain point? Do you find yourself, wondering, is it the right thing to do to put it onto the shelf, or do you just want to keep hammering away at it and trying to make it better? I'll say this for a reason. I've witnessed it so many times when someone's had a really great initial story, but because they weren't strong enough to tell that initial story, they allowed other voices to completely change it. But months later on, after they've realized, nah, this isn't what I want to do, they've come back to it. And because they have a stronger storyteller, they were able to realize an initial story and really realize it the way they wanted it to in the first place. I've always wondered, you know, as a more experienced storyteller, do you find yourself saying, no, I should let this thing, you know, let it lie for a second and grow as a person first? Or do you sort of just say, all right, you know, I give up, let me try to do something else for now?
Again, I think it's experience and balance, and there's no like one size answer fits all. Because for me, when I write a script now, I know when something's not working, and I may not be able to make it work yet, but I know it's not working. And then either I can seek some support and see if someone can give me some insight that will help me fix it, or I can just put it aside and come back to it. But then you really have that luxury, you know. Mostly, if you're writing for a particular job, and then there's no choice but to just do your best you can at that point, and then just see what happens. Because you know, if it's a feature script and the draft isn't quite there, and this happened. There's a film now that I mentioned that I'm kind of should be making this year, that we in talks, the legal talks now. We've kind of got a yes from a big party, two big parties actually in the States, to film this film. But when I first wrote it 3 years ago, it was there, and it was, you know, I'd done the job that I was hired to do, you know, and there was a story that, you know, and a model, a business model that the story was for. And it was a good film, you know. There's nothing wrong with it. It could have gone and been a nice thing of its genre, and it would have probably been, you know, not especially stand out, but I did the job that I was called to. And then we had some parties that were interested, and then the deal finally broke apart. And then we had some other people, and deal broke apart. And then it was kind of, the script was good, but it wasn't good enough to make people like, I have to do that. And for that reason, those deals didn't happen. And then when lockdown began, my producing partner called me up, and he said he wants to rewrite it for a new business model. And that was to make it much more South African. And as soon as we did that, then the story really opened up. You know, then suddenly it was, I could get rid of pretty much everything that wasn't working, keep only the best bits, and then invent new things that were really cool. But that freedom to do that is what changed it. And a year later, now it's got a lot of traction, and it's doing well. And we are going to make it. It seems definite. And we're going to do a series based on it. That's part of the deal, that the feature will launch a series. But yeah, it was just a question of actual timing. And when we first did it, you know, you can look at a script and go, yeah, it's good. And when you first do it, you're just so happy to be done, and you can see all the good bits, and you feel like quite high for me. And then again, a few months pass, and you look at it again with a more objective eye, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's bad, and there's this that bugs me, and this could have been better. But the opportunity just came through the process to keep it going, and to have another bash, and to make it better. So partly it is just luck, I guess, if you can do that.
I think with the remaining minutes we have just for the conversation between us, I want to actually poke your brain about something. So this whole theme that we're talking about today, this calling as a storyteller, do you find that, because I think a lot of people in this group right now are still, maybe they're developing it, maybe they've already developed it, or they've already become the master of, you know, their own form of storytelling. I know we've spoken about it before, I think, but you said that when you discovered the calling, it was already inherent in you when you were much younger. For me, I had the calling when I was a teenager to be a storyteller, and that was thankfully through an English teacher who thought what I was writing in a journal seemed like sense. I know a lot of people found their calling much later in life. Maybe they had to grow as an individual first, grow both as a person and spiritually, in fact. Do you find that in your experience, dealing with other storytellers, do you find that, you know, even though there's so many different journeys, that there is sort of like a plane for people to tell stories, and once you reach that plane, you're a competent storyteller? And especially considering the South African context, where we don't get to play as much as, say, the Americans do or the Europeans do. We're telling stories, seeing it work, seeing it not work.
I'm not sure I entirely get the question. So you say a plane.
Yeah, like sort of like I would say a standard. I mean, we always speak about like the global standard for storytelling, but do you find that to be a case, especially in, say, South Africa, where you have storytellers from all different backgrounds. We're talking about people from cities, people from rural areas, some people who only saw a film when they were 30 for the first time, really saw a film in the cinema. Yet they knew this is something I wanted to do. This is something that I wanted to be, and it was, a growth level to it. Do you find that in the numerous storytellers you've met, do you find that once they've reached a certain point in their storytelling ability, they've reached sort of like this level, and that they can tell any story? I don't know if I'm. I don't know
Okay,
if I'm
yeah, okay,
making
I'm
this
with you. I'm
sense.
with you now. Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
now I get it.
I think you get where I'm coming from. Yeah.
So I think there's like an ideal there and there's a reality there. So I don't think it really is necessarily about reaching a level here in terms of your ability to actually get to tell stories. Because there's just, I think for every person who actually gets to tell their stories, there's a journey of their own and their own path. And some of it has nothing to do with being excellent. It might just be that you're Jacob Zuma's daughter, which is a thing, and you've got lots of money and that's why you're telling stories. SABC are politically connected. There's a lot of that, especially in the people who actually get to decide what stories are told. And then there's just the lack of being connected, because it is an industry, I think, like all industries really, but more than most, it's about who you know. And if you wind up the writer who's hiring for the writing room, then you might get in there. If you've got a resonance between you, and there might be better writers who just don't have the connection and just never get to. And that's challenging. It's just a challenging fact. I do find that for most writers, though, once they do, if they are coming from, okay, I've walked a journey with craft here and now I'm getting to do it, mostly it's people who have their own stories that they like to tell, like they've got a voice that suits certain things and they found a niche, and they don't necessarily have a huge amount of range. They can't pick up any story. There's just certain stories that, are within their own experience that they can share. And I think that's quite common, that it's actually quite a rare writer who can properly step into another person's world and make that story work. So almost always when I read a script, I'll find that the fatal flaw of the protagonist is the flaw of the writer. And they're going through a journey creatively to also explore their own stuff. It's very rare to find the writer who can transcend that. Like if I read a writer who can jump between different worlds, different characters, different scripts, different themes, then I know I'm really reading someone who's like really far on their path. But it's actually quite rare.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I think the only reason why I'm here right now is because I decided to tell some personal stories. And somehow those stories translated to something that was meant to be seen on screen. And I think that if I have to wonder about maybe making films in South Africa, you've mentioned before, we don't have that much money. But I generally look to, the new wave artists, the new wave filmmakers in the various regions around the world, from Mexico to France to even new Hollywood filmmakers. We don't have a lot of money, but really, if you gave them a character or two and put them into a room with something to do, they were able to create a story. And I think that personally, from my side, as a South African, a young South African, the flavor of that story is what's informed by our life experiences. And you mentioned it perfectly. A lot of the times when I'm working with characters, the stories I struggle with the most is the ones I don't identify with. And if I don't identify with them, then what am I doing telling that story? And it's, I think, a harsh criticism of oneself, but you have to have that, because if you're already questioning yourself about this particular story, you best believe the audience is going to be asking themselves the question, why is this person telling the story? I'm not getting anything from it. I don't know. That it's also a difficult thing, because if you're going to become a writer in South Africa, especially if you are relying on it as your bread and butter, you are going to have to work in series. You are going to have to work in smaller films that get mass produced if you would want. Your Netflixes of this world probably are going to get to the stage where they're going to be mass producing smaller films, as they do with Nigeria right now. And you're going to be in a position where perhaps you don't identify that much with the main character, but you have to provide flaws, you have to provide character traits that you can exploit as plot points afterwards, and all of these great things that define story. Do you, do you find yourself at that point, critically asking yourself, should I be doing this? And then pushing on anyway because it's your paycheck and you need it, and you decided to abandon ship on everything else? Or do you pull back and try something else and still try pay attention to yourself as a storyteller? I mean, for myself, that was, I think, probably the thing that happened. It coincided with COVID, where I had to stop working on things that I wanted to work on and do other things that I had to do, commercials and things, simply because I had to pay the bills. But for some reason, the brain was working the whole time, and things had happened in my life that allowed me to tell newer stories that maybe 10 years ago I wouldn't identify with, but now I do. Being someone who's getting older, I guess there's not really a point to be made. There's no real question to be asked in this particular way, but it's more of like, if there are people who are listening to us talk right now about this calling and they're questioning whether or not their calling really identifies with the South African entertainment industry, be comforted, in the fact that maybe your voice is to be heard, but maybe the industry is not yet ready for it, and just keep slugging away at it, because that's how I got here, I think. I don't know if you have anything to say to that, Gavin.
Well, I would add, yes, definitely. I resonate with that. When I started, I didn't know a single person in the film industry. There was no real, when I decided I'm going to do this, there was no real film industry in South Africa to speak of. It's like 98. We have made a few films and this, but nothing really, not like today. And then, you go on the journey and suddenly so much materialized around us. And now suddenly it's really not a bad place to be in South Africa. Certainly not in the Cape where I am. But we've got about 3 minutes left of our little discussion. I want to ask you a question, because the thing about callings is it sounds very nice, but as in all stories, there's obstacles. It's not an easy thing to decide, I'm going to go and write screenplays. It's not something that many people would do. So I'm just wondering, when you said you got a calling, you're doing engineering, what convinced you that that was the thing? That, I mean, was it just an intuition, that this is what I need to do and meant to do? And then what were the challenges? How did you go from there to actually doing it professionally?
Yeah. Okay, so when I was still working as an engineer, I was still writing. I was still trying to write, at least. I had this mad idea that I'd become a novelist. I didn't have the discipline for it. And rather, I didn't have the idea that I was going to be making books as my primary form of storytelling. Even when I was writing, I was seeing the film. I could see how it was playing out. So for a long time, I sort of deluded myself into thinking that I was still going to break through as a novelist, and I just keep working as an engineer to pay the bills, and not realizing that wasn't what I was supposed to do. So I think it was about 2017 June. There was a huge personal crisis. A friend of mine died, and that really provoked me wanting to leave engineering entirely, wanting to leave behind corporate everything, just completely throw it away, and then try my luck in everything. So I sent out a whole bunch of queries, a whole bunch of letters. Nothing came back, and I really was going to go back into engineering, until a friend of mine who is a filmmaker still, reminded me that he had done a project. He had done a project with the NFVF, and there was this crazy thing called the Youth Filmmakers Project at that point. And being a youth, I applied, and I didn't really expect anything. I didn't think that it was going to be something. And I actually even applied on the last day of the due date, because for a long time I was like, what do I have to say in terms of film? I love film. My entire life has been driven by film and by good series as well. I've been inspired by it. I had nothing to say. I was not a film practitioner, and it was the furthest thing from me. So I got called in and said, do a pitch for us, because we like your story idea. We just don't know about you. So I had a pitch that went through. Somehow the group of people inside that room decided that this is the right person to try. And I think the rest sort of fell into place. I was fortunate enough to work with someone who was an expert in story. So I really had an idea, hey, this natural thing that I have in terms of telling stories if I apply craft to it, if I apply understanding of what story is, if I go back in the history books and go into what Aristotle was talking about in Poetics, or read up on the story books, I will have an idea of it. I mean, a lot of the books you read these days, your Robert McKee's and so forth, they're good places to start, but they're not necessarily books that you're going to be using to tell your story. A lot of these guys are academics. They've never written a book, never written a screenplay that has been made into a film before. So it's a good starting point, but really your own voice is something to develop. And that's what I found out. So I made my short film. I pitched it, directed, and luckily the same group of crazy people decided again that this is the right person to direct their own story. I was very fortunate in that way. I don't think that anyone else had the same kind of journey. So from there, then someone who was in that room asked me to write a screenplay for them for a film that they've been wanting to make as a producer. And you're absolutely right about this, who you know, because had I not taken the chance on being a filmmaker, had I not jumped out of engineering entirely and then relied on this thing to be my bread and butter, and failed a lot at that as well. If I had not allowed for that opportunity, that sort of mystic element, and really it was. If I wasn't lucky, I wouldn't be here. And if it wasn't my my place to be, I wouldn't be here. But if I hadn't allowed for that opportunity to manifest, I would have never have met that person in that room, and that film would never have been made, and I wouldn't be talking to you right now. And I have the daring ambition to be a better storyteller as I'm going forward. So I know for a lot of other people, it's a very different route. I know a couple of writers who went to school for it. Now, I think going to school for it, if you're unsure about your own voice, if you're unsure about who you are as a person, I think going to school is a great thing because you get to play, you get to experiment. But I was fortunate enough to be able to experiment from that background where I was took the chance and took the leap into it. But I have to say that if it wasn't for my 13, 14 years prior of trying to be a book novelist, I don't think I would have had the courage to actually make the leap into making films. And that's personal to me. It's not what everyone else is saying, what everyone else has over here. If it wasn't me failing at something else in terms of story and not realizing that actually this thing was meant to be where I tell stories, I wouldn't have had the naivety to think that I could just jump into this industry. And I think that with that naivety, I've been able to push as far as I've been able to. And then of course, COVID happened. But I think if you don't have that naivety to yourself, that naivety to say, I want to tell the story. I'm desperate to tell the story. I need to. If I don't, I will die. I mean, the Werner Herzog put it down very, very poignantly when he was making Fitzcarraldo, this movie where he had to take a boat through the South America, and he encountered so many things. Investors fled his project, but he told the cinematographer who was there, I will die before I not make this film. I will die before I leave this project. And if you don't have that, I'm not going to say that you should die for your films. What I am going to say is if you don't have that mania about it, then really, really investigate. Is this what you want to do? But if you do have that mania, if you do have that craziness to believe that you can tell a story, trust in it. That's where I am right now.
Cool. Well, that kind of brings us to the open section of the calls. So if anyone has comments, questions about this, about anything, the floor is open. I think there is some sort of a hand-holding function on this. I don't remember how that works, if anyone does. But otherwise, just jump in when you feel it.
Oh, no takers. So I'll go. Hi, guys. Sanele here. Yes. Interesting discussion. Interesting listening to both you guys' unique journey. And it's very true what you just said, Christopher, that all our journeys are very unique, because I came from the other end of it. I was a musician, like 10, 15 years ago, writing poetry and so on. And it was a friend who came to me, and they had to they had to write a play for State Theatre. And from him hearing my lyrics, he was like, you'd be the guy to write this play. You know, but it had, before that, it had never occurred to me that, you know, I can actually go make films, I can write and, you know, direct and so on and so forth. So long story short, I ended up in film school. 3 years after that incident, ended up in film school. And quickly after that, I started shooting commercials, music videos, and directing them. But I always had this desire to write my own work, you know, but also, like you guys touched on earlier, there's also the bills on the side. So, you know, I did my 3 years in film school, which was from 2010 to 2013. And from there, that's when I started, like, I mostly edited projects to make money and shot. But I always had this thing. So here am I at SABC, working in post-production, a nightmare. You know, I was basically handling all the footage from I was working for a subcontractor. So they had 4 shows. They had a game show on SABC 1, they had a talk show on SABC 2, you know. So basically they come, all the cinematographers come dump all the footage at my office, and I have to sync all the sound, right? Prepare it for the editors, right? Once it's edited, I have to come back, and it's called playing out, because SABC still has the old deck beta tape system where you have to play out the thing to tape so that it TXs a broadcast. So here am I in this office, and these cinematographers keep coming in, and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? I'm a writer. I want to tell stories. So I basically quit my job there. I think it was a few days after this, you know, and I called the operations manager at the time, because I couldn't just leave. I mean, so I was like, yo, listen, his name is Mr. Dikut. I'm like, yo, my apologies, but I have to leave, you know. And at the same time, I was getting projects. So I have a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So I'm getting music videos over the weekends. So I'm fitting all these music videos. And sometimes, you know, at work, we go over schedule. So I have to come in over the weekend as a media manager. But now I've got all this equipment, like I've rented like tens of thousands of rands worth of equipment, right? I'm shooting a music video on Saturday. Here's the people at work on Friday telling me like, no, Sanele, you have to come in tomorrow. You know what I mean? So I was at the point where I was like, yo, I don't know. I didn't have a plan. I quit my job, moved back home. This is like now almost 5 years ago. And I already had a screenplay that I had written while I was still in film school, actually multiple screenplays that I had been working on and off, you know. And then I just picked one. I started pitching to my friends, like without them even knowing, like I would just, you know, at a pub or whatever, just pitch these different ideas and see which ones my friends reacted to, even to strangers, you know. I remember this once, my fiance was laughing. I was pitching it to my 8-year-old nephews, you know, to see. I was like, okay, if I can get their attention in 30 seconds or less, then I'll probably have something here. So not to take all the time, but long story short, I moved back home with my parents, wrote this proposal to get funding from the National Film Foundation. And that's the project I'm currently developing now, you know, which I'm also going to direct as well. So it is interesting. And I've found over the years that there's nothing more important than collaboration, finding like those people, that network. And that's one of the nice things about going to film schools, because some of us build those teams early on. You know, I mean, the guys I'm working with now, the guy who's going to shoot my film, the cinematographer, he's gone on to do his own thing after we left film school. You know, he's done great things, from shooting big brands, Nike ads. I'll go down the list. He's done all of that. And it's nice for us, after all these years, I can talk to him and say, hey, dude, there's the story. And he's willing. So yeah, collaboration and networking is very important. So yeah.
I actually wanted to speak a bit about that. Sorry, Gavin, I don't know if you wanted to say anything. I was just taking down some notes over here. So, I mean, the last thing you mentioned, right? The cinematography that you worked with, the one that's now, progressed very far in his career. So I think Gavin will attest to this. The difference between being an above the line worker and being below the line is that a lot of the times when you're above the line, you have to create your own projects. You have to start your own films. You have to start your own things, whether you're the writer, the director, producer. And it takes a lot longer. It really does. You can spend a year or 2 years just to get to the point of being able to pitch an idea, to pitch a story idea, a film. So it takes you a lot longer. And you mentioned the whole thing with the cinematographer friend who's very far in his career. Well, I mean, being below the line, his career is dependent entirely on working project to project, right? So it was gonna have to take you a lot longer to develop your own voice as a writer and a director. But now that you suddenly meet this point where you're relying on his experience as cinematographer. But that just attests to the fact that in terms of what we do, telling stories, you really have to grow to the point where you can tell the story. You can tell the from on page or in front of the camera. You can actually do that. And other people, it's a technical craft. For you as a storyteller, it's both a technical craft as well as a personal journey. And then I'll talk a bit. You mentioning the editing part. Well, editing is how I think it's Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola, one of the two. That's how they got their career start. They were editing. I think it's Scorsese. He was editing, and that's where he said he learned how to make films. And he had gone to NYC, so he had spent a lot of time editing other people's films, and that's where he learned how to tell stories properly. So that when it came time to making his first films, he was able to take that experience and write it down with the writer. I think he was working with a screenwriter at that point. But the point of it is that he crafted his ability to tell stories from that experience of editing. And he says if he was born now and if he was a filmmaker now, he would be spending time editing other people's work in order to become a great storyteller. And last thing, I recently discovered Paul Schrader as a writer, as a director as well, but as a storyteller. Now, the stuff that Paul Schrader is talking about, Paul Schrader, of course, wrote Taxi Driver, a lot of the early films that Scorsese worked on as well. Now is a filmmaker in his own right. I recognized the other day, and I think it was about last week, when I was listening to what he was saying. He was talking about transcendent style in film. Sorry, such a big thing. But he was talking about film and storytelling on such a high level that I didn't actually realize that who I was when I started being a filmmaker is almost completely different to who I am right now. The concepts, the work, the understanding, the amount of personal journey that I've had to go through in order to understand the level of storytelling I'm at right now shows in me being able to understand Paul Schrader or not. So if that's anything to say to the group, if you're, if you're coming onto this stuff for the first time, if you're mystified by 3-act structure or 5-act structure, don't worry, you'll get it eventually. Just keep trying to make something, and the stuff makes sense. It's about you getting used to the tools. But yeah, thanks, Anil. That's a fantastic career, interesting career.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And just reiterate Tapisa's last point, because it is true. Like somehow, process it will become clear in the end. It's never really clear in the beginning. Colleen, thanks for the comment. I was wondering if you could clarify your question. What are you wondering about making films with iPhones? Would you mind just asking that in a bit more detail? Colleen? Yes. Okay. Thabiso might actually have more insight than me into this one, because you certainly can. I mean, an iPhone is a camera, and I mean, it sounds like you've got quite a lot of experience with screenwriting and so on. I've never tried to make a film with an iPhone, beyond like little pet projects at home for like friends and things. You know, it's certainly, I don't know, so I can't give you a particular question. I'll bounce it to him in a second, but I will just speak to low budget filmmaking because, you know, it's just one form of that. And there are particular competitions I understand that are around, you know, just using a phone and so on, that would give it a particular audience. But I think also what Thabiso was saying earlier, I think for most of us, part of the challenge if we want to direct is coming up with that great story that we can shoot on a phone, or that's a one location film that you can just do like really low budget. Okay, let's remember about communal project. We'll all get together and make films. I don't know of any at the moment beyond, you know, you get the 48-hour festival, which is you kind of gather teams and everyone just gets together and you've got a weekend to write, produce and edit something, which is a lot of fun. Mostly it's professional teams or student teams, and they don't use phones particularly, but it is a lot of fun. But it's not features. And I don't know of anywhere people just get together to make features. It would be quite challenging for the logistical reasons, I'd imagine. Thabiso?
Yeah, so just to, hi Colleen, by the way, so can you make your own film with an iPhone? Yeah, actually there've been two very successful filmmakers who have made films with iPhones. The first one is the filmmaker behind Tangerine and the Florida Project. I forget what his name is. I think it's Sean Baker, if I remember correctly. Sean, I think, made Tangerine with the iPhones. It was actually billed as the iPhone movie. And it's an incredible film. It's beautiful film. But the film works despite it being shot on an iPhone because of the fact that it's such a great story, such a great atmosphere. And not just as the director, but as a storyteller, the idea behind the film is so crazy. So just to give you a quick idea, it's a day in a life of two trans prostitutes living in Los Angeles. And there's a chaotic event that happens. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but they have to deal with the ramifications of that. So this was shot on the iPhone 4 or a 5, if I remember correctly. It's what broke open Sean Baker's career. I hope it's the right filmmaker, but it broke open his career. And really, he's become the auteur that he is now as a result of it. So yes, you can definitely shoot a film on an iPhone. In fact, if you really want to, there's a little bit of software called Filmic Pro. I experimented with it a couple of years ago. It's, I think, very, very useful. You have to pay for it, but if you know how to use a camera, then you know how to use that app as well as an iPhone. And it's actually a really good place to start. I personally think that every writer should at least make one film with a group of friends around them so that you can understand the process. Because the screenplay is not just the story, it's the blueprint. It's the thing that everyone's going to be making things. Okay, so you're going to be making shorts. Yeah, you should definitely make that, but just make shorts anyway. Even if it's with, don't think of the iPhone as being like the limiting factor. It really is the enabling factor. It's a great thing to shoot with. So yeah, Tangerine, you should check it out. Also, Steven Soderbergh has recently made 2 or 3 films using an iPhone. They don't look like them. You can actually watch one of them on Netflix right now. So it goes to show you that even films made on iPhones are on Netflix. But you know, that's not exactly a very high barrier at this point. But really, communal. Why don't you gather people around you? Tell them, look, we're making this thing for free, but I really want to make a film. So accept that there's going to be a quality level that's going to be present in the film. You know, it's not going to be the greatest film in the world, but you make it, send it to festivals, and it's your own film. It's something that you made. Speak to people around you, people who are good accountants, who are good organizers. Maybe they could be the producers on your films. Speak to someone who's good at shooting something with a camera. Maybe they could be a cinematographer. Maybe they've always wanted to be filmmakers as well. But the point of it is, don't wait for a community to be developed first before you make your first film. I think you should just make one anyway. And even if it's a terrible film, you know it's terrible. Don't let anyone else know about it. Whenever it goes into festivals or you're presenting to other people, say it's the greatest film in the world. But the point of it is, you know, you don't have to wait for the community to be there first. And echoing Gavin, yeah, the 48-hour film project is there. That should be a great place for you to test it out. Nothing works better than a deadline when it comes to making films. So that's the best kind of deadline that you possibly could have. Yeah, I don't know, Gavin, if you want to speak to anything further than that.
Yeah, I will add, but it might just be like that I think if one does go that route, there's lots of opportunity to actually use the device well from a story point of view, in the sense of obviously iPhones are used for video in real life situations all the time, and then the device suggests a story where it would feel more powerful if it felt like if it was a story that one would shoot on an iPhone, like something like, you go into a bank and something's happening and it's an observer who's just kind of catching it. And if that sort of feel of real life in the moment, you've just happened to pick up something on your phone and it's amazing and it's interesting and there's a story. I think playing with it from that point of view can be very powerful, because then it doesn't really matter. It helps that it's on the phone. Like if it was a Blair Witch Project and one's in the woods and all one has is the phone and there's a witch around or something, and it's like, but I'm sure that's not super interesting.
Well, actually, no. I mean, I think that's there's a actor, John Cho. He recently made a film, and we're gonna get to Pindile right now. He recently made a film where it is all Zoom calls, and it was a really interesting film because it was made entirely with Zoom calls. I don't know what the name of it is, but if you just check out John Cho, iPhone, try to figure something that works in that regard as well, with that same aesthetic in mind. Sorry, Gavin, I think Pindile wants to ask a question.
Sure.
Oh yes, hi guys. I don't have a lot of experience with writing, but I did go to school for filmmaking and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I think it was 2010. Yeah, I was involved in a car accident, and then I just went under the ground until this year. And when I got back, it was just a friend of mine. Yeah, we went to school together. And she was like, yeah, do you want to write something? We are developing something for KZNFC. Do you want to do this thing and write MTPs and stuff like that? So I'm pretty new in this thing, but at least they are patient with me. But then my question is, which one is better between just writing your idea, like your synopsis, your logline, and stuff like that, for you to get it to the funder, and writing everything yourself? Because I believe that when you take things to the funder, they fund you to get the script editor and stuff like that, and then you find that your idea changes along the line. So I think that's where I just want to know, when I want to develop some stories and where I'm developing some kind of stories, but I want to know where to take it. Do I just develop it and in terms of a proposal, or do I just go ahead and just write the whole thing?
From my side, also, it's not a question with one definite answer. It really does depend on what you want to do and where you're at in your own career. So if you've never written a screenplay, then it's very helpful to just write a screenplay and not wait for funders or anything, because your first one will almost never be amazing because it's just a first one. And it's great to get it out the way, and it's great to teach yourself, and then it can be exactly what you want, and you can know that it's what's come from you, and that's very helpful as a way to begin. If you've already been offered the chance to participate in a KwaZulu Film Commission project, and there is funding on the table when you hit those deliverables, then it's very worth doing. And there's a great advantage in getting to work with editors who are experienced. And even if your idea changes, if they are good editors, they're not going to impose something on you. They are going to allow new things to emerge, and they're going to use the problems that exist in the story to take you in directions that would make it stronger. And if you do have a good editor, because a bad editor will just impose stuff on you and tell you that's the way the story should be. And you need to watch out for that, and you need to be able to say no and be able to argue why. And that also comes with experience. So if you've already done your own screenplays and you have a better understanding of what you are doing, then you will be much better positioned to work with editors and others who come into your story. Does that help?
Yes, it does help. And my next question will be, how do you find the right script editor for your idea?
Also quite tricky, because it depends. If you're going through KZN, then they'll have their list of editors. And if you go through the NFVF, they'll have their list of editors. But they will give you a list of editors. And they will probably have a bio. And if you ask, there'll be a CV available. And I guess you should look first for, people who resonate on that level, like you just like what they have to say about themselves and what they've done. But you should really speak to a few and see, who sounds like they would be right for you.
Okay, cool. No, thank you. Thank you.
Indeed, I just want to add to what Gavin was saying. Really, with the right script editor asking questions about your story, if you're struggling to answer those questions, that's a good thing. It just means that there are layers to your story that you should be investigating. There's layers to your story you should be unfolding. And I think really the idea is that if they're giving you constructive criticism, if they're helping you along your stories, and a good script editor will do that for you. If you find that to be the case, you may touch levels that were there, but you were struggling to put onto page because of different reasons and so forth. So if you want to grow that way by working as script editors, it really is something. It really is a good idea.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
It's probably also worth mentioning that certainly with the NFEF, but I'm sure with KZN as well, you can change script editors if you find that you can't work with the person that you've chosen, because often you don't really know until you get into it and you have a creative process with someone. But then you can switch. It becomes, laborious and time consuming, but it's always worth finding the right person and just to know that you can.
I think there was a hand up at some point. I think it was Sanelli who had his hand up. I think maybe we'll ask Sanelli and then we'll go to Neliswa's question over here. Once you've written the screenplay, yeah.
Oh yeah, I actually wanted to comment on the question of using a phone for your film. Very seldom will you find an audience asking what camera you use to shoot something. It's very often your story and also the technique, the camera movements, and so on, and how that reflects the emotion of you trying to get across from the text. So whether you're shooting with an ARRI, which is a R1 million camera, or you're shooting with your over-the-counter point and shoot camera, it really doesn't matter. Nothing is more important than your story and your character. And also Pindile spoke about whether to write before you write a proposal, to write the screenplay before or during, or how to separate those two things. We all have different processes and we all come across opportunities at different times. So, but I would just to say just to her that there's nothing more important than working on the story, developing the characters, make sure your characters are rich, the place, the environment you put your characters in is also a character in itself. So usually those are ideas that develop over time. And it's because sometimes when you read a first draft from someone, it kind of jumps off. You can tell that it's a first draft. It's usually those drafts that the writer has taken time, to develop those characters and the story that you, when reading it as a reader, you don't have no relationship to the person who wrote the screenplay. Those are the things as the reader that jumps out to you. So nothing replaces actually working on the craft itself. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so Gavin, I'm just going to ask you to look at Neliswa's question, and then we'll go on to Mbonisen. He's put his hand up as well, and then we'll go to him afterwards.
Maybe you can just help me with the question, or
yeah.
Neliswa, I'm just a little bit confused again. What?
So I think what Neliswa has done is that she's written a screenplay that's just scenes. There's no dialogue at this point, and I think she's basically asking, almost as if when you're writing an outline, you just have events that are happening and no characters that are talking to each other. And she's asking whether she would want to submit it somewhere first before adding dialogue, or she should add dialogue and then submit it. So I can say that I think she should write dialogue, but I think, Gavin, if you want to say something further to, because it's not really a screenplay at that point, it's more of an outline.
Yeah, I would agree. It just depends. One would do a step outline without dialogue if one was in a development process. But if you actually want to raise money, people don't really want to read a step outline. They either want to read like a 1-page, this is what the story is about, or they want to read a script. And when you've already gone so far, the dialogue is actually what's quickest and generally easiest. Once you figured out the scenes, you know what's happening in them, to put in the dialogue need not take you that long. So I would definitely finish it, and then you've got a script on your hand, which is much more useful than a step outline, which again, outside of the development process, is not a document that anyone cares to read.
Okay, I'm just going to ask Mboniseni to unmute himself or put his camera on and then ask us what he wanted to ask us.
Hi, greetings all. In fact, my question is based on these two things, which is the script and the outline. I just want to find out whether my approach is appropriate here. That I spend most of the time doing drafts over drafts on the outline itself, rather than writing the script and do the drafts on the of the script. So I basically spend most of the time outlining and then doing drafts over drafts of the outlines or scene outlines to say, okay, these how are the character layers here? How are the plot layers? Are there any depth in the characters and all of that stuff? Still at the outline stage, not necessarily on the script stage. Now, I just want to find out as to whether is that a good approach to spend more time on the scene outline stage, then so that by the time I go to the script itself, I already know that these are the emotions that I have to put into these scenes, rather than jumping onto the script and then do maybe multiple drafts of the script, instead of spending much time on the outline, at designing the danger of to say, okay, in this scene here, my character should be in this danger, my character should be in the hope, my character should be in what dilemma, at the outline or scene outline stage before I go to the script itself. Is that possibly a recommended approach or what? Thank you.
From my side, I think it's a very personal thing about your own process and what works best for you. It obviously makes a lot of sense, before you get into the screenplay itself, to know what those scenes are about and what's happening. It certainly will save time. And when we do development processes through the NFVF, etc., we always have someone do a step outline, because it's much quicker to read to make sure that everything's correct. And we start even with the major turning point document, which is 5 to 7, sometimes 10-page version of that, which is even smaller, just to make sure that structure is really, really clear. Because if one can't get it in the short version, you're not going to get in the long version, and then it's just more for everyone to read, and it takes longer to work with. So it is certainly very helpful to get it all done in the step outline. But it is personal. I mean, some people like to tinker in the script itself, and often if they not very experienced, it actually helps them to see and judge certain elements like length and whether a scene will work or not, to actually see it there in the page, and they need to see the whole thing. But if you can, do that and gauge what the final product will look like in the step outline, then absolutely it makes lots of sense to just do all the polishing and the work in the step outline, and then just put it into the draft when you're ready.
I'll just add that every screenwriter has their own way of dealing with it. I think it's useful to, at some point or another, to do both, just going straight into it and then planning it out in an outline. Certainly the outline is cheaper. Certainly the outline relies on less time spent on it. I would say that what you're doing works for you. I would just say, be careful that doesn't become the only writing you do. And that's just in the outline for that story, at least. At some point or another, you should feel comfortable to push yourself into making the screenplay, but only when you feel comfortable. I think that what you're doing is great, because in fact, a lot of professional screenwriters, both here and I think also in the States, do a lot of outlining for long times before they actually put the screenplay out there. Paul Schrader definitely does it a lot. He recommends it. So I think you're on the right path.
And I'll just add for myself, I kind of like to do like an MTP type document. And then when I get into the draft stage, I go straight into the draft stage, but I kind of build it slowly in Final Draft. So I don't have to do a step outline in Word and then get into Final Draft and create it. But I'll figure out my broad structure and then I'll just go into the scenes myself. I prefer writing that way, but it's just a personal process thing.
I hope that answers what you're asking.
Yeah, no. Yes, no, it does make sense. It does make sense. It does make sense.
Right. I think we do have some time. I think about 10 minutes to go. Do you want to, anyone else have any other questions?
Well, just to add to Mr. Oh, go ahead, Mbonisen.
Oh, yeah. In fact, sorry to say that when I was asking the question, it was still pitch dark here and the electricity has just come back. So I had a list of questions. Now I can see them clearly here. No, it is also on this question of the drafts. As the experienced people like yourself, how many drafts do you have to do before you can show it to a producer to say, look, here is my script? How many drafts? And when if you have to do multiple drafts, after the first draft, when you do the second draft, what are you actually looking at? When you go to the second draft, what are you actually looking at? Are you looking at a specific thing in the first draft or in the second draft? Are you looking at the specific thing in the second draft, or are you just approaching it all holistically, looking at the character layers, looking at the story layer and what have you, or are you just specific to say, on my second draft, this is what I'll be focusing on. On my third draft, this is what I'll be focusing on. On my third draft, fourth, fifth, depending on how many drafts that you do. Which one do you normally do? How many drafts? And in each draft, do you focus or do you say all embracing? That is my question. Thank you.
Lisa, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think what's kind of helpful is having someone around you who you sort of take a first swing at when they want to read what you've written. So generally, you write until you feel comfortable, or you write until you're sick and tired of it. Those are two things that I think help inform whether or not it's kind already. But look, you have to understand that it's not going to be perfect. In fact, there are 3 times when you write a story. One is at the screenplay level, the other is when you're shooting the film, and the third one's when you're editing the film. So understanding that it's not going to be perfect, but if it does what it needs to tell the story, to get people on board, then you know you're dealing with a script that you can work with. I generally, whenever I'm working on something, I send it through to my wife first to read. She loves film. So she'll tell me straight away if she hates it or not. And if she hates it, then I'll ask her. So don't tell me, what don't you like about it? And then I think about it and I say, okay, maybe she's crazy or maybe it works. But the point of it is you can't do it in isolation because you are listening to a voice that's inside your own head, not necessarily asking someone else. I mean, you're not looking at it from an objective point of view, if that makes sense. Not to say that people around you are going to look at it from an objective point of view either, but at least it helps to have a second voice to look at it. And I don't know, Gavin, I think you'll probably speak more to this than anything else, but I find that having another person be a sounding board, but like a really calm and patient and, helpful sounding board helps a lot to determining whether or not your screenplay is in a good shape or not to move on to the next phase.
Yeah, and for me, it's partly in your question. There's a question of what is a draft really, because you can reach the end of a screenplay and then still not be done, and then you kind of go back to the beginning and you make another pass at it, but it's not a new draft. So when I get to the end of a draft, almost the first thing that I've done is almost just figure out what actually happens. And then I'll immediately go back to the beginning and then try and now that I know what happens, then I'll start making the scenes as strong as they can be. Because once you know what happens, then you can go back to the beginning and start rethinking the whole thing. Because at first you're just trying to kind of figure out what's coming, and then you don't even know what comes later. So getting all the pieces strong, working together is the process that will take me through a pass, 2 passes, 3 passes, until all the material is as strong as I can make it. And when I get to the end, and then I know this at the moment, I can't do more. Like, I'm a perfectionist. If I will get to the end, and then there'll be a stage where no, I've done everything I can think of now, and from my perspective, I can't make this better at this time, and I'm done. At which time, that's when my draft is done. That's that draft, and then I will give it to whoever it is who's there to read it, and it could be a personal friend or writer that I really rely on if it's a personal thing. But I don't really do that very often. It's going to be nowadays a business partner, and then they'll come back to me, and then they'll get notes. So depending, they will see. Inevitably, you can never see everything yourself. I mean, there'll inevitably be places where I've maybe done repetition or something's not necessary, and then I'll get notes from them, and I'll make it stronger in another draft. But just as often, then that same draft will go to other partners, and they'll give me their notes, and then I'll get a series of notes from the director, the distributor, producer, and they'll all have their input, and then I'll sit back, and then the next draft will be me working with those notes and working with the story to incorporate and figure out, and then that'll be a second draft, and if everyone's happy, then we're good. And if they're not, then there'll be a third one based on new notes. But it's really, every time I sit down and finish a draft, it has to be as good as I can make it. But then that's just one draft. And then the process of new drafts is just the process of team members, business people coming in and having their own needs and having their own opinions and perspectives, and me needing to work with those.
Boniseni, I'm gonna have to ask that we come back to your questions again the next time we have the work. Well, this call. I think definitely I want to hear more about your questions, but I wanted to just address what Vicky has asked over here. Hi, I'm a first-time story writer. I've written a film script and now I'm busy applying for funds. I don't know who can assist me to put it out there. Please assist. So, look, I'm gonna say this to Vicky as well as to every person who's here who's first time, doesn't really know the ins and outs of the industry just yet. If you don't have a group of people around you that you can work with to put your film out there, look out for the NFVF, Gauteng Film Commission, KZN Film Commission. There are a lot of organizations that are willing to help you with this. Look out for their calls. All that you need really is to have an outline, and the outline is basically having your story in a nutshell in different descriptors. So it's a log line, it's your title, it's a synopsis, it's all of these things. Having an outline, making sure you're registered with SARS as an individual, if you are going to be doing this as an individual, making sure that you have a certain list of documents that are ready, and applying. The hardest part, I mean, I've always been told, if you want to make a film in South Africa, it's literally one form away. The reality is very different, but the idea should still be there that if you are a first-time storyteller and a writer and you've got something, apply to your NFVF. So this will call them, email them, ask them. They're contrary to popular belief, they actually do answer emails. They do actually look at things, especially if you approach them and you're direct with them. And then look for their calls. NFVF, so it's the National Film and Video Foundation. They're the main body for dealing with film and television in South Africa. They're the ones who put everything through. Okay, thanks. I think Annelies got it, but apply for them. It literally is just a series of documents that you need. And if they like your idea or they believe in your idea, they don't necessarily have to like it. They will put you onto the right path of trying to make it a reality. Now, if you don't have access to applying to NFVFs and your KZNs of this world and so forth, I would think about trying to find other people who like film, who like series, who like these things, and trying to come together and bounce ideas off them, bounce scripts off each other. Of course, IP, making sure you're copyrighted, there might be a problem, but developing your voice with fellow filmmakers who are also novices might be a way to get started, watching films with each other, engaging. If the whole approach of going to the NFVF, Gauteng Film Commission, KZN Film Commission is something that's a bit beyond you at this point, but that would be the first place I would try. Look for their calls, go onto their website. They've got a whole bunch of information of what's needed. And I don't know what else to say. That's the best I can do at this point. I think, Gavin, if you have anything more to add to that.
Yeah, Vicky, I'll just jump in because you do have a full script. You've basically got a few options. So Tabiso's suggestion is the primary one. It's the most likely to succeed. The NFEF, they have, I believe they still have cycle 1 open for production and development. And if you send to them, whether you're looking for production, because you've already got the script, or whether you're looking for development and want to make that script better, your best shot is in cycle 1. They sort of they allocate funding that can run out if you're in the towards the end of the year, but they have it all at the beginning, so it's the best time to do it. And if you submit for production and they don't think the script is ready for production, they can still send it back to you and say, we'd like you to submit to development. And sometimes they even, say that we will award it if you submit for development, because the standard of the script is really the biggest determiner in terms of getting production funding. So you've got that option, and that's great. And if you're in Durban, KZN is also as good, and the same if you're in Gauteng, as Tabiso said. Otherwise, if you are able to network with independent producers, if you've got a script, you'll need a one-pager and a log line, something that just says, okay, this is my story, and grabs them, because they're not going to read a script. No busy, successful producer reads scripts off the bat. They just don't. So they're all very busy, and you have to get them with a log line and a one-pager if you're going to get them at all. It's very hard to find. There's very few independent producers here who can make films happen off the bat, but it's great to have one, especially if you're going to apply for production funding. You should look and find out. There's the Independent Producers Organization, IPO, might be able to give you a list of producers. And if you can get in touch with one, partner up with one, if one likes your story, it's always a great, it's something, every writer should have a producing partner if they can. And then the broadcasters are your other possibility, but they're really not a possibility, really. So they very rarely take outside submissions. It's mostly commission stuff, but those are your only options, and it is challenging. I wish you good luck.
Another crazy idea is a lot of production companies, if you know someone who's in a production company, this is a crazy idea, but I think if you could try it out, it might work. If, for example, they're looking for new writers, and generally they do need some form of proof that you can write. So if you take the first 6 pages of your script, or the first 5 pages, hand it to that person who is going to go to a production company, maybe they could ask around and try their luck as well, to say, here's someone who wants to learn how to write, who really wants to be in this thing. I know it's happened for some people. It doesn't happen for everyone. Once again, IP, copyright. If the story is dear to you and you don't want to let go of it, yeah, don't do that. But maybe you can write a short film or something and, I don't know, send it around. But look, there are many options. There are many ways to it, short of you trying to make the thing yourself. And if you want to make it yourself, get in touch with the producer, as Gavin has said.
Yeah, and I'll just add, given that writer's calling thing, it is trust and luck. You have to be willing to hang in as long as it takes, and there is an element of luck. And if you believe in your script and you believe in yourself, it might take you on a journey, but you'll probably get there in the end. But it will be, odds are, like quite a journey. So I think that is us kind of out of time. Is there any? That I was actually going to mention that, yes, to protect your script, there's no like guaranteed bulletproof method. Best thing to do is to not give it to anyone who might steal it, because the real people wouldn't. But there is a script registry service through the Writers Guild. If you go onto their website, you can register it there, and it just guarantees like this is the script at this date. And that's something, if there is contest, you can always take into court but you just don't want to get to that place where there's contests. So, I mean, it can be something, particularly in our local industry, that's a problem. I mean, the SABC is actually notorious for stealing people's ideas. But the real like successful independent producers really aren't out to do that. So yeah, just be discerning in who you deal with. Would be my suggestion.
Just to also add just to add to that, focus on getting a good outline, a good one-page outline. That usually is a good testing place for engaging with new people you want to be the producing team or anything with. Don't send your entire script to someone, because as Gavin said, unfortunately there are people out there who will take your idea and make their own form from it. So focus on getting that good outline. And if you want to know if there's a template for an outline, I think if you just type in one-page outline onto the internet, I think there's definitely resources for it. If you want, I can provide something to you, but I think the NFVF itself has a one-page outline document.
Pindile?
No, I was asking if do I need to copyright my idea before I send it to the NFVF? Not just the producer, but the NFVF, like when you're looking for funding, do I have to copyright my idea first?
No, you don't have to worry about the NFVF. And also, an idea can't really be copyrighted. Only the expression of an idea can be copyrighted. So you can copyright a screenplay or something concrete, a piece of music. The idea itself can't be. Cool. So, yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, Gavin, I think it's time.
It's time. Well, then, thank you all for joining us very much. We really appreciate that people came out to listen to us and participate. And thank you for your contributions.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, especially today. Level 4 load shedding. I know it's I think definitely it's a case that you have to fight for this. And I'm really thankful for the people who have come up. I know a lot of people may have had questions, may have wanted to say something. We are definitely going to be having this going forward. It's bi-monthly, if I remember correctly. So please write down your questions and then we'll get to it. But this is a community. This is a group of people who want to take this thing forward. And from my limited experience, from Gavin's very extensive experience, hopefully we'll be able to help everyone over here and provide more information.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Cool.
guys.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, cheers, guys.